How much does it really cost to own a retro Corvette? Well, I owned this C4 for over 4 years. So in this video, I'm going to show you exactly how much it cost to buy, repair, and own this Corvette. Was it a dream come true? Or a wallet-emptying nightmare? Let's find out. Hi there, I'm Brad, and welcome to Retro Cars Forever. Anyone who follows this channel is going to be quite familiar with my 1996 Corvette Collector Edition that I recently sold for this 2007 C6. So I wanted to make this wrap-up video giving you my final thoughts on the 4th gen Corvette ownership experience, including a full breakdown of expenses, how those expenses compare to other cars, and sharing some of the valuable lessons I learned along the way. So let's start with why I bought this car in the first place and how much it cost to purchase. Back in 2019, I test drove dozens of fun cars, looking for a reliable vehicle that I could drive every day and occasionally zoom around the canyons in. At first, I wasn't seriously considering C4 Corvettes, as I heard the stereotype that they were kinda crap. But I kept an open mind and drove this nice example of a later model year, and I suddenly realized that C4 Corvettes offered amazing style and performance for the money, and the later model years offered significant upgrades in performance, reliability, and refinement. I didn't love this red color, but I knew that I wanted a C4. So when this final year, 1996 Collector Edition came up for sale, I knew I had to check it out. It was a stock, one-owner car with a little over 30,000 miles. Crucially, it had the hard-to-find manual transmission and the one-year-only LT4 engine. There were also some nice extras included in the sale. Unfortunately, there weren't that many service records, so I knew I'd be spending some time and money with deferred maintenance to make it a reliable daily driver. The other slight negative, the Corvette was located in San Francisco, 6 hours away from my home in Los Angeles. But after long phone conversations with the very friendly seller, and agreeing on a price, checking that the Carfax was clean, and that it had a fresh California smog report, I felt confident enough to purchase a $135 flight to go see it, the very first expense. In person, the car was as good as I had hoped for, so I bought it. The price, $17 grand, paid with cash. Gas to drive back home was $85, so I had spent a total of $17,220 to get the car. Not bad for what looked like a really sweet ride. Let's go. Now I'm going to cover the C4 maintenance costs during my ownership period, which was 52 months and 10,021 miles. My first maintenance bill came just minutes after purchasing the car. This Corvette had Goodyear tires with plenty of tread, but they were over a dozen years old, way over the 6-year safety limit. So before driving home, I took my new ride immediately to a tire shop where brand new BF Goodrich all-season tires were installed. I made sure to order an alignment, as the stiff suspensions on these Corvettes can often throw the geometry out of whack. I also had the shop deal with some other age-related maintenance items like an oil change, new transmission fluid, a new drive belt, and new wiper blades. Total cost for this service, with a coupon, was a reasonable $982, $730 of which went towards the tires and alignment. So after driving home, I installed a new engine air filter myself to the tune of $35. I also got a pack of fuel system cleaner for $42 and put a bottle in the tank every 6 months or so. Then I went to a trusted local service station to get a lot more new fluids. That included the brake, power steering, and differential fluid, most of which had likely never been replaced and were long overdue. I then noticed my coolant reservoir measuring cap was leaking a bit, so I got a new one to the tune of $8. Next, the power driver's seat started making this noise and wouldn't move, which meant the rack underneath was in need of replacement. I went with the refurbished rack, which cost $225, and did the swap myself. I wish I could have done more DIY work, but living in an apartment without a dedicated garage severely limited what I could do, as I had to use an alley out back. Next, I sought out a classic car specialist for the next round of overdue maintenance items, which was the fuel filter and the engine coolant. The coolant exchange on the LT1 or LT4 engines is a little trickier than most, as the knock sensor underneath the engine needs to be removed in order to fully drain the old coolant. I also had the shop grease the front suspension Zerk fittings, another item that's chronically overlooked in these cars. This service cost $240 in total. In early 2021, I took the car in for its last bit of deferred maintenance, changing the original hydraulic clutch fluid. I also got an oil change and had the front suspension lubed again. The tab for this visit was $360. Afterwards, I noticed the clutch pedal effort felt a bit easier because of the new fluid. Soon afterwards, the rear brakes started chirping, so I replaced the brake pads myself. I also replaced the front pads while I was at it. All 4 Akebono ceramic brake pads came out to $202 in parts. No one's paying me to promote Akebono pads. I've always just used them because I find them to be quiet. I like that they make less dust compared to metallic pads, and unlike other ceramic brake pads, Akebonos don't have complicated break-in procedures. For anything that isn't hardcore track use, these pads are my choice. By the way, after I was done with the brakes and got the car off the jack stand and jack, I was shocked at how hilariously high the suspension looked. This is actually totally normal. It leveled off after a quick drive. That summer, while going on a canyon drive with friends, I noticed that the engine was starting to overheat. These cars are designed to run hot. 225 degrees is totally normal, but this was getting into the 235 degree range. Usually that means some junk has gotten stuck in between the radiator and the AC condenser here, but I cleaned that out and the issue persisted. So I nursed the Vette home and took it to a mechanic who replaced a faulty thermostat for $256. 2022 was a new year, so I gave the Corvette a new battery, which cost $198, replacing it myself. I then took the Vette in for an oil change, as always using Mobil 1 synthetic per the owner's manual recommendation, which cost $104 to get done. I then noticed that my shock absorbers were leaking. The original shocks had essentially collapsed over time, making the ride extremely rough, even by C4 Corvette standards. To save money and time, I ordered 4 new OEM shocks to the tune of $405. I then had them installed for $430 worth of labor. The upgrade in ride quality and handling was immediately noticeable and worth every penny. Next up, the infamous pop-up headlight motor issue reared its ugly head, making this telltale clunking sound. I repaired and rebuilt both sides myself using this $45 kit, and I made a whole video on this procedure here if you need it. The summer of 2023 hit and my air conditioning needed a refresh. Like I have in the past, I got a can of AC refrigerant and filled it up. Turns out those gauges on those cans aren't super accurate, and I ended up overcharging it. A blow-off valve on top of the AC compressor thankfully saved the system from destruction, but it was time to call in a professional. The AC service plus another synthetic oil change came out to $371. Worth noting that C4s made before 1994 ran on older discontinued R12 refrigerant, which is expensive to get a hold of, and another reason why I chose a later model year. A few months later, I made a common C4 owner blunder. I installed the target top on an uneven surface, this one in fact, which didn't even seem that uneven. But because the C4 structure is so loose, it's easy to bend the target top posts, which started this annoying squeaking sound right behind my head that wasn't there before. I ended up removing the inner plastic of the halo, adding some foam and grease, and messing with the adjustments there, which did the trick. And my final maintenance expense, 4 new tires. Maybe not surprising considering the zeal I have for driving in the canyons. I ended up regretting the all-season tires I originally bought for the car. We only have one season here in Los Angeles, and that's summer, so it was a mistake to get tires that were formulated for all the seasons. The all-season tires felt slippery in canyon driving, and the sides were grinding down prematurely. So after making sure the old tires were thoroughly used up with a few donuts, I plunked down $1,290 for a set of Continental summer tires, which I loved. The summer tires had way more grip, and canyon carving was way more fun. So over the course of 52 months and 10,021 miles during my ownership, I spent a total of $5,554 on maintenance costs, which works out to 55 cents per mile. For context, the average vehicle on the road only requires about 10 cents a mile for maintenance costs. But keep in mind that the average car is about a decade or two newer and driven way more often, around 15,000 miles a year. I couldn't find any info on how much classic or retro cars like this cost on average for maintenance, but I was able to compare my findings with a similarly thorough cost breakdown of another C4 Corvette. This car was owned by Mike on the Hoffman's Hoopties YouTube channel, which I'll link to below. Mike's car was similar to mine. a low mileage 1996, and in comparably good shape. He also did a moderate amount of work on the car himself, so we had very comparable ownership experiences. Mike spent a total of $4,480 on maintenance, about $1,000 less than I did. But the big difference was he drove his car much less than I did, so his maintenance costs per mile were double mine at $1.04 per mile. Now, I'm not saying that I was a better owner than Mike, or that I had a better car, or that I'm financially smarter, but I do think this shows you how driving your retro car more often is the best way to keep the maintenance costs per mile down. Well, you don't have to twist my arm. The other big cost to Corvette ownership is fuel, especially when you have a thirsty V8 and you live in California. And keep in mind, premium is required for just about every C4. According to the EPA, later C4s got better mileage than earlier ones. My car's updated EPA ratings put it at 15 miles per gallon in the city and 24 on the highway. The highway mileage turned out to be accurate, as the tall gearing of these cars means the engine barely spins above idle. But whatever city the EPA used in their test must have a lot less stop-and-go traffic than Los Angeles has, where 10 to 13 miles per gallon was what I actually got. I also frequently took my Corvette on spirited canyon drives, and I found performance driving like this would return only around 8 to 10 miles per gallon. I rarely took the Vette on long trips, so my overall fuel mileage wasn't great. I averaged 13.4 miles per gallon over my 4 years. Premium gas prices in my area over that time averaged around $4.30 per gallon. That means my Corvette drank a total of 740 gallons of gas, which cost me $3,216 or 32 cents per mile just for fuel. For context, the average new gas-powered vehicle gets 26.4 miles per gallon, which means fuel costs would be around half as much, working out to 16 cents a mile. And over at Hoffman's Hoopties, Mike spent 25 cents a mile on gas with his 1996 Corvette, but worth noting that he lives in Colorado, where gas is much cheaper. But either way, it's unavoidable. You'll pay at the pumps with an older Corvette. Now let's speed through registration and taxes, as living in California means that's also going to be higher than most other states. After purchasing the car, I went to the DMV to pay the redonkulous sales tax, which is 9.5% for Los Angeles County, which worked out to 1,615 smackaroos. I also sprung for this rad personalized plate because what's a Corvette without one? For my third year ownership, the Corvette needed to go through a smog check, as cars in California made between 1976 and 2016 have to pass a smog check every 2 years. Thankfully, as always, the Vette passed with flying colors. Filling up all these bureaucratic charges, and I paid $3,085 for the right to own this car in the City of Angels. Painful, but that's just the price we Californian car lovers pay for year-round sunshine, no rust, endless car events, and world-class canyon roads. Insurance is another expense that's going to vary wildly based on who you are, how you drive, where you live, but I'm being thorough, so here goes. I've used State Farm insurance for my entire life. This is not an ad for them, but I've kept them around because I've been grandfathered into some awesome old discounts, and I found they paid out fairly in the few accidents I was involved in throughout the years. Believe it or not, I also have a clean driving record, as I keep my hooliganism to places and times that are low risk. All told, insurance cost me $4,108 for my 52 months of C4 ownership, which was $79 a month. The last expense is detailing supplies. As I drove my car pretty often, I didn't keep it as meticulously sparkling as many Corvette owners do, but I would give it a thorough cleaning, clay bar, wax, or ceramic spray, usually every month or two. Total cost for detailing supplies during my ownership, $426. So how much did I sell the car for, and why did I sell it? Well, I have a good friend who lived in London who would often visit us here in Los Angeles. As a fellow car enthusiast, I'd always let him pilot the C4 on canyon drives whenever he visited. Eventually, he decided he wanted to move to the United States, and he was looking for a cool American car for his new home in Charlotte. I was starting to get the itch towards a newer Corvette like a C6 anyways, for all the reasons I detailed in my C4 versus C5 versus C6 comparison video here. So I sold the C4 to him for $22,600. Considering I originally bought the car for around $17,000, that might sound outrageous, but these cars gained a decent amount of value over the years since I got it. Also, my friend didn't have to deal with any of the deferred maintenance costs like I did. In fact, I probably could have sold the car for $1,000 or $2 more. And if you want to know exact values of C4 Corvettes by different years and options, check out my C4 buyer's guide next. In this case, I was just happy to make a friendly deal, as I knew my buddy would take good care of the Vette, and I'd be able to visit the car whenever I visited him, which I did recently in fact. But hey, celebratory donut time! I made $5,380 over the original purchase price. But clearly I had other expenses, so let's add everything up and see how I did. Here is the grand total of what it cost me to own my C4 Corvette for a little over 4 years and 10,000 miles. $16,389. But I need to subtract the $5,380 I made from selling the car for more than what I bought it for. That means my grand total expenditure of C4 ownership was $11,009. That works out to $1.09 per mile and $211 per month. So let's compare that with Mike at Hoffman's Hoopties. He also sold his car for more than what he bought it for, and his expenses were pretty comparable. But he owned his car for a few years less than I did, and like I said earlier, he drove it less than half the miles. So Mike ended up spending $3.22 per mile and $439 a month. Quite a bit more than what I did. Now, I don't think he made any major mistakes, and he did enjoy the time he had with his car. But I think the lesson here is the longer you own a retro car and the more you drive it, the better financial value it's going to be per month and per mile. For context, let's compare these C4 Corvette expenditures with that of the average car on the road, which is much newer and is driven way more. The average car in the United States is driven around 15,000 miles a year, so the total cost per each mile is much lower at 72 cents. But per month, the average car costs way more, $894, double what Mike spent on his Corvette each month, and over 4 times what I spent on mine. A big bonus of owning a retro car is you don't have to deal with depreciation. Depreciation alone can easily cost a new car owner well over $300 a month. So a retro Corvette is not only more fun to drive than your average car, you should also be able to spend less for each month of ownership. So now that it's come to an end, what do I think of my C4 ownership experience? Overall, I loved it. It was not only fun, but it was also a pretty good deal financially. But I do feel like this was a best case scenario and that I stacked the deck in my favor. So here's some tips I'd suggest if you want to have a happy and affordable C4 ownership experience like I did. First of all, I got a C4 from a later model year. Earlier model years are generally more trouble prone, so if you want to depend on your C4 as often as I did, your best bet is to go with the last 3 model years of 1994, 1995, or my personal choice, 1996. More details in my C4 buyer's guide. I also waited to buy the exact car that I wanted and was willing to travel to get it. I hear a lot of nightmare stories from owners who picked up the first C4 that they saw because it looked cheap and was close by. But then it turned out to be a basket case that needed a lot of work that they ended up losing a lot of money on. While my car needed occasional mechanical attention, it never broke down or suffered any major catastrophes. I was also thrilled to get the exact spec that I wanted, so don't be afraid to look beyond your immediate area like I did. Personally, I'm too risk averse to buy a car online sight unseen, but expanding your search to a state or 2 away is a pretty low risk strategy that's worked out well for me 3 different times now. Worst case, you'll lose a few $100s in a day of travel time if the deal doesn't go through. But best case, you find yourself with an awesome car and you'll get to play with your new toy right away by driving it home. Another good strategy that made my ownership experience a happy one, I took pains to make sure all the forgotten preventative maintenance was taken care of. There's so many consumables that break down with age, especially when it comes to all the various fluids. But when these fluids get old because of age, they don't work properly, and that can lead to costly component failures, which I was able to avoid. So even though I spent a lot of time and money on preventative maintenance, I think it saved me money in the long run. I also saved money by doing many of the simpler tasks myself. Any car that's decades old is going to require occasional work. If you can't do it yourself, your car will end up in the shop much more often, costing you more time and money. So I'd only recommend a C4 if you're somewhat handy with cars. And hey, if you're a car repair beginner and need some helpful guidance, check out my top 5 tips for car repair video here. Another way I stack the deck in my favor, I drove my Corvette often enough to keep it healthy. It's a misconception that's good for old cars that just sit around for months, but that can lead to all sorts of mechanical atrophy. It's actually optimal that these cars should be driven up to operating temperature at least twice a month. I was driving my C4 at least twice a week, so it got plenty of exercise, keeping the car in good shape while also holding that average per mile cost pretty low. And my C4 has continued to be reliable even for its new owner. My friend ended up driving it across the country solo, from Los Angeles to his new home in Charlotte. It's now his only car, a true daily driver, and it hasn't had a single issue over the past 6 months under his care. So if you treat your old car well, it'll treat you well back. I'll always be thankful that I was the caretaker of this terrific vehicle. I'll cherish the memories that I had with it, and I hope that others can have a similarly wonderful experience. So let's hear from you in the comments below. If you've owned a retro Corvette, what was your experience like? Do you think it was worth the cost? Let me know. I love hearing your thoughts, and I read and respond to every comment that I get. Don't forget to subscribe and check out all my other videos custom selected for you on the screen right now. Thanks for watching, and remember, if you have a cool car, get out there and drive.